Hi, Matt Frederick here, and welcome to Early Retirement Through Real Estate Investing. Today's topic is very interesting, very timely, and I think a lot of people will enjoy it. Today, I'll be covering my investment history just to give you a bit of my background, let you know why I'm qualified to be here speaking to you and presenting this. I'll talk about two basic principles that everybody needs to know if you want to retire early. We'll talk a bit about the cash flow quadrant, but not about business. We're going to use it as a foundation to place real estate in. Then I'll talk about the types of real estate I think you should use and what I used to be able to get to early retirement. Also, I'll talk about the math behind it, how to implement that strategy. Then we'll talk a bit about, okay, how do you launch 2022? How do you make 2022 an amazing year? So let's get started with my history in investing. What you see on the screen right now are 30 of 50 properties that I had as buy, fix, and rent. Today, you can call that BRRRR, buy, fix it up, rent it, refinance it, and repeat the process. The 30 that you see on the screen, I no longer have, but I'm showing you this to realize that I have experience, if you look in the upper left-hand corner, in the old Victorian homes, turn of the century. I've had triplexes. I've also had the war homes, the 1950s, 1945, 1950 homes. I've had the 1960s, 1970s, 1980s properties, as well as I've had townhouses that I've had to rent out, including duplexes, side-by-sides, and the like. Now, that's important to understand because what if I just took 3 of my properties and break it down? Before I get to the next screen, notice how I have 15 and 45. Now, what is that? Well, most people start working at 22 years old and they retire around 67. So 45 years is the standard retirement plan that 90% of the population adhere to, and that's okay. If you use real estate, even just 3 properties on this screen, you can get there in 15 years, and then I'll show you a way to get there in 5 years. Let's take a look at just 3 properties on this screen. Now, the properties I've chosen here, I actually sold these already, but I bought them initially in 2005. One was on Fennell Avenue, Limage West, and also Upper Ottawa. These are Hamilton, Ontario properties. I bought them in 2005 for about $150,000 each because that was the going price. They're all 2-family homes, which means I had a basement tenant, and I renovated the basement to make that happen. We all had the double wide driveway so that cars can park side by side as opposed to having to jockey cars around in tandem. Now, bottom line is today, fair market value on these properties would be $750,000. And 15 years later, these properties would be paid off. Mathematically, what does that look like? Well, if I look at it 15 years after purchase, the mortgages will be 0. And the equity in the properties, all 3 combined, would be $2.25 million. So that's $2.25 million worth of equity in that property 15 years later. Now, can I retire on that? Well, yes, I can. I can borrow up to $1.8 million from that and invest that every single year in a different opportunity in a passive way to cause me to be able to make the income I require. Not to mention, these properties bring in $125,000 gross revenue. When you subtract away the taxes, the insurance, and the repairs, which is $25,000, that would be $120,000 coming in before taxes. Why no mortgage? Because at $150,000, 15 years later, those would be paid off. So I'm just saying to you, if you are thinking, can I actually make money with real estate? Because sometimes we have friends who just don't believe it. All they had to do was buy these 3 properties and wait a while. And 15 years later, they would see the results. Now, this isn't just a one-time thing. I bought properties in 1998 in Cape Coral, Florida. And these properties back in that time was about $98,000 to about $100,000. These are beautiful properties. They have pools, a lanai to protect you from mosquitoes, and they have canals behind them for boat slips, which means you can jump in one of these canals and head all the way out to the Gulf. Amazing properties. By the way, I probably wouldn't swim in the canal. You might get an alligator rolling you. Bottom line, these properties today would have a value of about $2.25 million. So just the first 3, had I kept them, and these 3 would be close to $4.5 million. In 2001, we bought some cottages up in the Northern Ontario area. We bought 5 cottages. They were all about $85,000 to around $100,000. Now, today, those properties would be worth about $3.5 million combined, although I did sell four of them a while ago. I packaged it, created a great system, and sold four of them for more than the value. But again, all I had to do was just hold on to them. And also in 2008, when people were running in the US, running from Arizona, because property prices were crashing throughout the US, I didn't run away from it. I was brave because fortune favors the bold. I ran to it. I bought these three properties that were previously about $750,000. I bought them all for under $300,000. And today they're back to about $750 each. Right there, we're looking at another $2.5 million. So I've just showed you, just by waiting for the last 15 years, I could have had $10 million in my pocket to retire. So it's not a rocket science thing. It's a due diligence thing. It's a delayed gratification thing. It is 15 years. Now, I will show you a way to do it sooner than that. I have some background with older houses as well, and with newer houses. In this case here, I've built 35 house subdivisions. I've also built townhouses in the 40 house category. I've also built 113 houses as a massive subdivision. And I tell you this because I want you to understand that when I teach you today, I'm not giving you my opinion. I'm giving you my history, my experience. I'm giving you facts. We are entitled to our opinion, but we're not entitled to our own facts. I know it's a very popular saying out there, but it's really important to learn from people who actually have done what they say they're doing and have been around long enough. I've been around 31 years in order to see the results. I've also had a chance to own multifamily buildings built in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, multifamily being from 6 to about 34 unit buildings. I've also built brand new buildings in the 50 unit condo or the 23 unit condo category. So I have that experience and I'll share that with you today. People always ask, okay, what are you doing right now that's exciting? I don't know. I think I like Belize. I find that exciting. And Belize is just below Mexico and it's just adjacent to the Caribbean Sea. Look at this beautiful water. I mean, I want to be there right now. Well, I want to be here teaching you, but I still want to be there right now. What are we doing there? We're building these 3-story, 3-unit properties, about 2,400 square feet. The first level, we rent out to what's called an expatriate, someone who's retired from, for instance, Canada, the US, Australia, maybe even England, and they have a pension coming in, guaranteed money, and they rent from us all year round. They may rent from us for 2 or 3 years till they establish themselves. We also can rent the main floor and second floor to expatriates. Why would I rent the main floor to an expatriate? Because I want someone there all year round so that in the down seasons, it's not empty. And we can keep the second floor and third floor open for Airbnb for our own use, or even keep the first and second rented out full time and the third for Airbnb. So on paper, that's what it looks like. In reality, here's where we're at. These take about 5 months to build. And you can notice we like the nicer finishes, as well as what you cannot see is a rooftop patio. Ultimately, owning your own company that builds down the Caribbean means you can add a west wing when you want. I've talked a bit about my history. Hopefully that brings a bit of credibility. Now I'm going to teach you 2 principles that I believe you need to know to be wealthy or to be able to retire in real estate in a shorter period of time. Success is based on conservation of energy. Well, what does that mean? Well, people at some point in time used to go down to the river, gather water, and bring it back to the house. Doing that a few times, and depending on how far the river is, that could be 2 or 3 hours of your day. A lot of energy. Well, they invented plumbing, indoor plumbing. So therefore, it's much easier to get water from the tap. Indoor plumbing was so much easier than going down to the river that it actually trumped, it surpassed, and it made going to the river obsolete. Notice how, as you go to the next level, at that next level, whatever you're doing makes the previous level obsolete. Second thing, horse. Horses were domesticated about 5,500 years ago in Kazakhstan. The automobile was invented, I would say, 1886 by a gentleman named Benz. Obviously, horses, you have to feed them, care for them. If you were to drive from city A to city B 1 hour later, to use a horse would take you 3, 4, 5 times as long. Therefore, the automobile trumped the horse. But in both cases, with tap water and the auto, we had to go to the next level up, which required a lot more technology, a lot more knowledge, a lot more understanding, and a lot more investment up front to be able to invent those things. Going from the sword to the gun, to use a gun is a lot easier than a sword. Again, it's an invention that took us to the next level, but once we got there, it was easier. Therefore, it trumped the first. But again, there was cost. Why is that important? It's important because when you look at yourself, if you work a regular job, 45 years later, you retire, that's like going to the river to get your water. Exact same thing for your entire life. You can shorten that by doing a 15-year process, like I mentioned earlier on, by buying 3 properties and holding on to them as you rent them, or you can do something that requires more upfront initial investment, time, expertise, and you can do something where you can retire in 5 years. Let's take a look at the regular 15-year process, using your own money. Well, it takes lots of energy to make your money, and also takes a lot of time to make it. Looking at other people's money, we've heard it all, OPM. It's really borrowing private funds from somebody else to buy your property, as opposed to going to a bank, because it's hard to qualify at a bank when you're buying multiple properties and you're just starting out. A VTB, which is known as a vendor take-back mortgage, that's simply private money being borrowed, but not from a private source. It actually comes from the owner. The owner says to you, okay, I'll give you a mortgage, you can pay me over time, as well as the bank can give you mortgages along the way. And of course, a joint venture, which I like the most, is when somebody comes in as a partner, they provide the money, take a passive role, and I have 5 years to actually make that money back. Most of my JVs are 5 years. Now, there are people out there who always say, let me show you how to buy property, lots of property, with no money down and no JV partner. That's ridiculous. I'll tell you why. In your first year, if you bought 5 properties and you borrowed money from people, private money, you're probably paying 8, 9, 10 to 15%. At the end of that year, I'd hate to be at your house because you're now struggling to find the money to pay off those 5 mortgages that were private, that were just too expensive. And at some point, you got to pay the vendor back his or her due. So it's possible, but guess what? It's almost like going to the river 10 times a day, as opposed to myself going to come to my house where somebody has provided the down payment money and the mortgage, and I have 3 years, 5 years to pay them back. So don't discard joint venture partners. Now, how does this work? When it comes to UFO, which is your own funds, pretty much you take a greater risk when you invest them. It's harder to make that money back, so there's a fear of loss. You get burnt out and tired making that money, and in the end, you probably end up paying more taxes, and it stops people from acting. OPM, other people's money, people always say to use that, but what they don't tell you is that you have to get that, and to get that money requires a lot of knowledge, requires you understanding the fundamentals of how deals work. You have to understand how to network to find those people to provide the other people's money. You have to understand to find the partners to come on board to be your power team, to be your fix-up team, and even to bring money to the table as well, maybe a JV partner. And you have to find the properties, and especially off market in a lot of cases, so that you don't have to worry about competition. And you have to have a system to run the whole thing. So OPM sounds pretty flashy, but OPM is very difficult to get if you don't have the fundamentals, the networking ability, the finding of partners, the finding of property, and the systems. It makes it very difficult. And it's no free ride to learn all this. But it's our goal, isn't it? To try to get this information as fast as possible. Yes, there's an upfront cost, just like there's an upfront cost to go to plumbing indoor, upfront cost to go to the automobile, upfront cost to go to the gun. Got to put that cost in. And once you get it done, now you're conserving energy. Second point is simply this. Number one secret for early retirement is simply you have to live in the present. Too many people are living in the past, living in the future. You have no control of the past. The past teaches us lessons. The future is a waypoint, a place to go to, a place of hope. Neither place you have traction. You cannot go back last week and change the past, and you cannot bring Wednesday next to today in a moment. I heard a saying, and I'm not sure who said this, but I think it's very powerful. A person who's not living in the present is the same as a person leaving their house with their doors unlocked to go look for burglars while they're trying to keep their house safe by leaving the doors unlocked, not living in the moment, not living in the present. Folks, too many people are not living in the present. In fact, I believe they're dying in the present. Now, we're supposed to be living in the present. How do I know that? Because when you meet somebody, you say, hey, how's your life? You don't say, hey, how's your death? How's your living, not how's your dying. And we are literally committing suicide. Let's take a moment to define that. People don't commit suicide because they are upset about the moment. They commit suicide because they say, I cannot live this way for 50 more years. It's about the future. They don't have hope for the future, and they end it today. And that's a sad thing, but something that we have to understand, that suicide takes on many, many forms. There is something called screen addiction. I know investors who spend their time looking at Google or Instagram or TikTok or Facebook or Gmail or Hotmail. You can't get anything done because you're living in that moment where you're distracted. At the same time, Facebook competition. This is huge. Sometimes you look at somebody on Facebook and they're doing great, and you want that to be your future because you think that's their present. Well, actually, it's not even their present. It's not even their past. It's not even their future. It's literally what they just invented. And now all of a sudden, I want it now. I want it today. Well, wanting it now or wanting it today is a lack of discipline, but it's also a lack of delayed gratification. 45 years of labor to retire, that's not delayed gratification. That's extremely delayed gratification. 15 years is delayed gratification. 5 years is sort of delayed gratification. You can't just become wealthy in a moment. Keeping in mind that when somebody says, I want it now, and they don't take the time to learn, all of a sudden it hurts relationships, it hurts their soul, it hurts their energy, it hurts their finances, and it hurts their facts, F-A-C-T-S. They spend too much time picking data from people who they know are saying nonsense things, but because they want to hear it, because it makes them feel as though they can get what they want today, they take advice from the wrong people. So before I close this section off and jump onto the next section, you need to understand getting complete information from A to Z, not A, B, C, and then skip, D, E, F, and then continue on. And getting things from 1 to 10, not 1, 2, 3, and then maybe skip 4, 5, 6, and then getting the rest of it, that is not going to get you there. Information is important, but you have to have complete information. And that's critical. Now, I've taken care of my history. I've also taken care of the base principles that I want you to understand. Now, I'm going to talk a bit about the cash flow quadrant, and I'm going to use this as a process to lay as my foundation for investing in real estate. So let's talk a bit about the cash flow quadrant as a foundation. Now, let's get started. I'm going to talk about the cash flow quadrant. Then I'm going to show you how it relates to physical real estate. Then I'm going to show you the math behind it. That's our next 3 sections. I'll end off by showing you what you can do to launch 2022, make it one of your best years for investing. So going back to the cash flow quadrant, it was written by Robert Kiyosaki. Now, we know Robert Kiyosaki from Rich Dad, Poor Dad, which I think was a great book. It's a mind opener. Now, why was Rich Dad, Poor Dad so great? Makes you realize that you get information from your poor dad, you get information from your rich dad, and maybe your poor dad loves you, but that information may not be relevant to wealth. And that was an eye-opener for most people. I think the follow-up book called Cash Flow Quadrant is a must, and it's very critical. Now, some of you have read it, so I won't spend too much time on it, but for those who have not read it, I'll spend a moment to define it. And I'm going to tie this into real estate, and that's why I'm doing this, to tie it into real estate. I think it's a great format to help you get to understand how to retire early. So according to Robert Kiyosaki, we have employees out there, we have self-employed, we have business owners, and we have investors. So those are your 4 groups of people. When it comes to the person who's the employee, you work for a company, well, you have a job. It's your job. You go to that job. If you're self-employed, well, you own a job. You might own a small business, and you feel as though you're making a bit more money, but keeping in mind now, I'm not responsible for everything, because as with a job, it might be 9 to 5. You can leave at 5 o'clock and spend your weekends. Maybe things are good on the weekends, but when you have your own company, there is no 9 to 5. It's whatever the client needs. and you may lose all your weekends. And in the end, you may end up not even making as much money. But mostly people do make money with their self-employed business. Even a doctor is self-employed. The problem is on both sides, the job and the self-employed, the person, the principal person has to be there to make money. The other side, you own a business with lots of different systems and you have people working for you. So you can take a day off if you need to, because people are going to be there working for you. And now you're getting the benefit of more labor and from those systems. And the last section of the right-hand side is the money investor. You're not getting your hands dirty like the employee. You're not working in your business with your head down like the self-employed. You don't even have a business with systems and employees, which you have to oversee as an asset manager, as a CEO. You're just investing your money into one of these systems in a passive way, and you're collecting the benefit. And you're not really using as much energy. You're conserving the most energy, and hence wealth comes from conserving energy. So just going back to that principle, if you have a job, you're using the most energy, then self-employed, I would argue, you use a lot of energy as well. With a business system, you're using less energy, and as an investor, passive investor, you even use less energy. Now, let's talk a bit about what if you are an employee. Let's say you're a plumber. You're working for somebody, self-employed. You're a plumber who has an apprentice now, and most likely an answering service. And you have a truck, and you take your truck out, and you actually go and do the job. That's still one side. The opposite side would mean you have multiple plumbers working for you, and they have multiple apprentices. You have maybe multiple locations in different cities, and you have office staff taking care of most things for you, and you have a number of equipped trucks. So you're able to take a day off work if you need to, but the system is working for you. And the last person, the investor, is not a plumber. It's a person who invests in the business. So you might put money into the business, and you could even diversify by putting your money into a plumbing business, an electrical business, an HVAC heating business, or even a further diversification into something completely different, like maybe a restaurant. So that's a migration of being a plumber to an investor. Take a second to ask yourself, where am I and where do I want to be? Now that we've defined this, here are some of the common conversations that you hear from each different category. So employees generally say, hey, I hate my boss, I hate my job, I have a hard time with my coworkers, I don't get paid enough, I'm not getting any good pay increases. If this were real estate, this would be like a house where you're renting out a house and your boss would be your tenant. And you're talking to your tenant, and they phone you, you work your job 9 to 5, you come home 7:30, you're about to eat your dinner, your tenant calls you and wants something, and you're like, man, I want to just grab them and like, oh, you can't breathe? Ugh. That's the feeling that you get. Now, when it comes to self-employed, we have a different scenario. People who are self-employed generally talk about their clients. They complain about their clients, how unreasonable their clients are sometimes. You know, the customer's always right, although deep down inside, they don't feel that. And although they get some higher pay being self-employed, you have issues with your employees. Now, remember how I said when it comes to the employee, it's like you're a landlord, you have a property, and your boss is your tenant. In this case here, you have a larger property, maybe a 6-unit property, and it's working for you. But you know who your boss is? Not your tenant as much, but as your contractors. You have a repair job to be done. You put a repair job out, and all of a sudden you get the invoice. You're like, what the hell is this? Where did this high number come from? I mean, geez, you know what? Here, take my blood. It's almost like your contractors become your boss. On the next side, we have the business owner, and the business owner generally is the CEO, and they hire people. That's like having multifamily buildings where you have multiple tenants and you have more than one building, and you have property managers to manage them because the building is large enough for you. So with those property managers, okay, you're not there at 7:30. And the last comparison, if I were to tie in the real estate, would be you're investing passively in a portfolio. You're investing in somebody's portfolio. So you're getting passive income while you're not really there taking that phone call. And now let's tie this all into the real estate. And this is how it looks. Let's say you have 3 houses, and they're all 2 units. So you have 6 houses, you have 6 tenants. That would take about 15 years for you to get to retirement. Okay, you can double that and have 6 houses or even 9 houses, and you'll get there a little bit sooner than 15 years. But here's the problem. We're going against the law of conservation of energy. Because when you have 9 houses, you're always busy dealing with different things. This one has a fence problem. This one has a furnace problem. This one has a hot water tank problem. Oh man, I'm refinancing 6 properties this year. It's just a bit of a headache. I have a buddy of mine, I loved him, he was great, died at 50 years old. He had lots of property. Every time I would sit with him at lunch even, he'd always be taking phone calls. I'm saying, why don't you get a property manager? He goes, I just can't afford that right now, but I'm an active manager. I go, but you have kids. You know what? He died at 50 and he was busy. So it's okay to make money, but all of a sudden, what did he do? He left his job, his 9 to 5 job, to buy 9+ houses in order to take on now a 24-hour job. You're just trading your boss. And that's not a smart idea for everybody. If you would buy a 6-plex instead, now you have 6 tenants in the same building, and the building is built for abuse. Houses, even if you renovate them, are like Honda Civics. They get beaten up. And for the first 3 years, because you renovated it, you don't have a lot of problems. But once you get to the 4th, 5th, 6th year, it's like buying a car, especially a luxury car. It begins to fall apart and everything costs a lot of money. Well, a building is designed to be robust and take a beating. But a 6-unit building is not so great because number one, they're expensive to buy because the person who's selling it, they probably cut their teeth on it, spent a lot of money on it because it was their first, and they want twice the value of whatever even makes sense. So that's why I tend to buy, 10 to 16 to 24 unit buildings instead of 6s. And then secondly, the 6 is too small really to pay for a property manager. So it's a stronger building, so you're reduced. It's in one location, reduced stress, but you're still managing it. And that's a bit of a problem. The next level would be, let's say, a series of 16-unit buildings. And if you have this, you can retire in 5 years. But how do you get those buildings? Well, that's where the private money comes in, the VTB comes in, and a joint venture partner comes in. That's required in order to help you buy those buildings. So they buy it as the passive investor. You take on the role as the active investor, and you split the profit. And that's how you get to retirement a lot sooner. I do have some videos on joint venture and multifamily buildings. I want you to find those videos, take a look at them, talks to you more about how to get JV partners. Bottom line is you have to have more knowledge to be able to do this, more understanding of how to find those properties, how to find those partners, the fundamentals and the operation. It doesn't just come easy, but that's why you can retire in 5 years. The next level is once you have this kind of portfolio and your income is going up, you can borrow against it because your equity is going up, and you can loan money as mortgages, or you can loan money as a passive investor into somebody else's building. So that's how you look at it, using the cash flow quadrant, substituting it with houses and buildings. That is how somebody retires a lot sooner. Now, what I'm going to do is go into the math of these 3 houses. Instead of going into the math of the 6-unit, I'll go into the math of the 16-unit because it really kind of helps me to teach this a bit better. I'll go into the math of the mortgage and the title deed. Okay. Before I jump off the screen, again, houses is like having a horse, and a bicycle is like a 6-unit property. Again, horses were domesticated 5,500 years ago. Bicycles, the first one was in 1818, but the first one with a pedal was in 1885. A gentleman named Stanley created a pedal bicycle. First automobile was created in 1886, just like 1 year later, by a guy named Benz. And of course, the first plane was in the early 1900s, 1902, 3, or 4, and it was the Wright brothers at a place called Kitty Hawk. And again, you'll notice how every jump requires a certain amount of effort. Let's take a look at the early retirement math. Okay, right now I'm looking at a house that's $590,000. Now, can you get one more expensive? Yes, you can. Can you get one cheaper? Yes, you can. But in order to get a cheaper property, you generally go further away from a larger metropolitan center. So you may have to go, if Toronto is your base, you may have to go 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. And the further away, generally, you get a better price. If New York is your base, the further away you go into a smaller town, the better is your price. But just quickly, we're buying the property for 590. We're putting 20% down. It's a house. It's a residential. It's under 5 units. So that's $118,000 out of your pocket. And the closing cost is about $11,800. That's just 2%. What is the closing cost, by the way? Well, it's your inspection, it's your appraisal, it's your title insurance, it's your legal fees, it's your financing fees, and your land transfer tax if you're in a state or province that charges land transfer tax. If you're in Alberta, there's no land transfer tax. And the mortgage here, it's a 25-year amortization. I would go for 30, and 2%, which is a reasonable rate that you can get. So the mortgage on this property is $472,000, which is 80% really of a $590,000 purchase. Let's say your renovations take 6 months. So the renovations themselves, plus to carry it, to pay the fact that the property is empty, to cover all that, $120,000. So that's where we're going to start. And then let's see what kind of money can come in. With this kind of property, the rent, 3-bedroom main floor, $2,300, and the rent 2-bedroom lower, the basement, $1,900. 2% vacancy rate is standard, although in this area, the vacancy rate is probably 0 or 1%. So the total income monthly is above $4,000, and the total income yearly before expenses, before mortgage, is about $49,000. So what are my expenses? Well, in this case here, the property taxes are just above $4,000. The insurance is just above $2,000. The water bill is about $1,200. Geez, I'd love to be able to pass that water bill on to somebody else, like the tenants, if possible. I have a buddy of mine, his name's Dan Ills, and Dan has a system that when the water comes into the house, it splits it so you can charge tenants separately. If you want to get to know Dan, make sure you DM me. I'll give you Dan's number. Just a great guy. In this scenario, we're paying for the heat. The landlord's paying for the heat, but not the electrical because we don't see electrical here. So it must have 2 separate meters, and each tenant is paying for the electrical. By the way, if the tenant was paying for the heat, the rents would be a little bit lower. The reason why they're about 200 higher here and about maybe 150 higher is because the landlord's paying for the heat and it's bundled in there. It's bundled into the rental rates. Then, of course, lawn and snow, who's taking care of that, who's taking care of repairs, who's taking care of the internet, and as well, in this case here, it's a house not being managed, no management fee. If it were to be managed, it'd be probably 6%. Anyway, a lot of talking to say to you that $49,000 comes in, $13,000 goes out. Your net operating income, which is revenue minus expense, is $35,982. And now we bring our mortgage into play. On this house, at the end of the year, before taxes, you take home $12,000. So it's $1,000 a month cash flow. A lot of properties that are making a little bit more than that, a lot of properties that are making less than that. Now, what do you do with this property as an investor? Let's take a look at the big picture. What does after repair value mean? It means after you've renovated, after you bought a property for $590 and you put $120,000 into it, all of a sudden it's been reassessed by an appraiser and the new value is about $820,000. So that's a pretty good increase. Keep in mind that if you take $820, subtract away what you paid for it, plus your renovation costs, you actually have a profit of after repair value of $110,000. So focus on the $12,000, focus on the $110,000, and know that we bought it for $590,000. Now, when people say refinance, what are they talking about? What is a refinance? What is a BRRRR? Well, a refinance just means that if I can take 80% of this property as a refinance, it means that if the value is $820,000, look at the lower middle of the screen, if that's the after repair value estimate, times that by 80%, it means I can get a mortgage of $656,000. But I have to pay out my first mortgage of $472. Simply means that I have $184,000 I can take out of this property to put into my next property. And that's really what's called BRRRRing a property. Now, in my scenario here, I'm not going to do this portion. I'm not going to BRRRR it. And I'm going to say that $12,000 is my cash flow. I'm going to say that $590,000 is what I paid for it. And so focus on those 3 points. And now let's take a look at it on this screen. If I have 3 properties, that means we have 590 times 3, so at 1.77 million. If 110,000 is my increase after repair value times 3, I'm at 330. If my cash flow is 12,000 per property times 3, I'm at 36,000. If my debt reduction, because I'm paying my mortgage, 15,000 a year is being taken off the principal, that's about 44K when you times it by 3. And properties appreciate today between 15 and 20%. But if I said 10%, you're getting an $82,000 increase times 3. The complete potential, and I say potential because you don't really realize the appreciation or the debt reduction until you actually sell the property and that money comes into your pocket, or you refinance it and use it. But the potential is there as well as the real income. So income and potential total is 656. Now, what I'm going to do is instead of looking at a 6-unit building, I'm going to grab a 16-unit building. I'm going to break it down the exact same way. And what I'm going to grab is a drink because that last section took a mouthful. Okay, so now I'm looking at a 16-unit building, and it costs about $2.35 million. This is an actual property being sold in Belleville today. These are actual numbers. 35% down. That's what you do for commercial properties. Anything above 5 units is not 20% down, it's 35% down. I've seen 30%. And your closing costs, pretty much the same as the other, same category as the other one. In this case, it's 2%, a little bit more. And your mortgages are generally around 3.5%. If you go through Canada Housing Mortgage, they will give you a better rate, 1.7, 1.8%, but it takes about 4 months to get qualified by them. So it's a long haul, kind of hard to put an offer in and hold somebody's property off the market for 4 months. And that's why I like to get off-market properties. There's no competition. They were not selling it. Now I'm going to convince them to sell it, which means I get the time that I need to do that. Renovations, $50,000. We're just going to renovate 3 units, simple renovations, and we'll go from there. Now, 12 units, 2 bedrooms, 4 units, 1 bedroom, total money coming in, $229,000 a year, plus laundry and lockers. We rent lockers, we charge for laundry use through 2 washers and 2 dryers. It's about $5,400. Vacancy is 2%, so looking at about $230,000. Property taxes, insurance, the heat, the power, the water. Okay, red flag here. I don't like paying for heat, power, and water. Okay, I'll pay for water. Okay, I'll pay for heat, but I don't want to pay for the power. So ultimately, I'm going to have to place in there metered units. If a tenant is in there, technically, if you're not in Alberta, you can't just increase their rents to whatever you want. When they move out, I can then add the electrical portion to the next person's bill. So even if I put in 16 meters, if my tenants are still the same tenants, I'm stuck until each one leaves before I'm able to put in a new rent, plus have them cover their utility. Somebody takes care of the lawn, the snow, and mops the hallway. We have internet and security. There's cameras throughout the building. Garbage pickup, well, in this case here, it says there's a bin. The bin has to be picked up. Some buildings are so close to the curb that the garbage can go to the curb, get picked up by the city. And of course, management's about between 6 and 10%. In this case, management is about 6%. What's coming in? $230,000. What's going out? $93,000. What's your net operating income? 230 minus 93, $137,000. When you pay the mortgage $81,000, there's $56,000 a year coming in for the one building. Remember, for the one house, it was $12,000. For the one building, it's $56,000. Keeping in mind the building obviously costs way more than the house. This cap rate is 5.9%. That's a high cap rate, but this is Belleville, Ontario, and you're getting between 5.7 and 6.5% cap rates. If you don't understand cap rates, it's okay. In most cases, you'd be lucky if you got a 4% cap rate or 4.2% cap rate. Quickly, if it's worth $2.75 million after repairs, and I bought it for $2,350, and I took $50,000 to fix 3 units, then I have an after repair value increase of $350,000. If I were to get 70% of that, not 80, but 70, I'm looking at pulling about $394,000 out of this building to do something else with. So I've spent some time to go through the actual physical house, and I've spent some time to go through the building. And just a quick comparison, if you were to look at the 3 houses are cheaper at 1.77 than 2.35. So that wins. At the same time, the after repair value is 350 versus 330, the building wins. The cash flow is 56,000 as opposed to 36,000, the building wins. The debt reduction on the mortgage is 44,000 with the houses. They beat the 29,000 for the building. The building is a 30-year amort, so it's reducing its mortgage a little bit less. And the appreciation is 10%, which beats the appreciation on the actual building itself. Now, keep in mind that 656 is more than 573, but that's not how you're supposed to look at it. Don't look at it that way. Here's how you look at it. With 3 houses, conservation of energy is out the window. So you make a lot of money in certain areas, but you lose a lot of your time. You begin to not live in the present. You live all over the place because you're dealing with so many different properties. That's what you have to keep in mind. So in the end, the 16 unit wins. And with 3 16 units, now we're at 7 million. The cash flow is obviously $170,000. This is a better way to go. You add the actual after repair value to the debt reduction, to the appreciation. You have over $1.5 million in equity that you can take $1 million from that. Now, what can you do with $1 million? Now, in the cash flow quadrant, we're heading to the lower right-hand corner, the passive corner. With $1 million, and you can get this million by borrowing against your properties. With this $1 million, you can choose to loan it out. I choose to loan it out twice a year, $1 million for 6 months, and then $1 million for 6 months to somebody else. In other words, I charge a loan fee of 1.5%, which is reasonable. So that's $15,000. Loan out my $1 million at 12%. 6 months downrange, I get the money back, and I loan it out again to somebody else, which means I charge a second fee of 1.5, so I get another $15,000. When you combine it all, $15,000 the admin fee for the first 6 months, $15,000 the admin fee for the second, plus the 12%, $120,000. That's $150,000 coming in before taxes. Of course, you have to know how to structure that, and that's where an accountant comes in. Now, this is secure. It's not just a loan, it's locked against property. It's interest only, which means they pay the interest portion, and then at the end of the term, they pay back the whole bulk. I generally do 6 months, so I can turn my money twice. The more times you turn your money, the more admin fees you have, the more money you make. They're closed mortgages, meaning if you paid back in 2 months, you still have to pay me back what you would have paid me back in interest if it were 6 months. Loan to values are 80%, which means there must be some equity there to make me feel safe in case something goes wrong with the property. And there's no extension. 6 months is 6 months, as well as the default penalty if you don't pay back. Can you do this for 1 year? Sure, you can. The other aspect of what I like to do is instead of being the active investor, the person finding the property, negotiating it, locking it down, inspecting it, do due diligence, putting tenants in there, overseeing the property management, and running it for the next 5, 6 years, I prefer now to be the passive investor, where I'll put the down payment, I'll put the closing costs, I'll put the mortgage in, I'll sit back and receive 50% of all the benefits. Tell some people say, wait a minute, you're putting all the money in, but you're receiving 50%? Well, I'd rather put all the money in and receive 50% of something than put no money in and get 50% of nothing. So for me, I love living in the lower right-hand corner of the quadrant, where I'd rather just invest $1 million and be passive, also invest my money into the actual joint venture of a building and be the passive person to collect that money, conservation of energy. So when you bring all 4 together, here's what I'm telling you. I'm going to sum this up. You can have lots of properties, houses, and that's great. But you know what? You're not conserving energy, and you're not living in the present. You're all over the place. And you'll find that you're trading your job, your 9 to 5, for a 24-hour job that is just not even thankful. Ultimately, after 10, 15 years, you're going to be able to leave your job. That's tremendous. But by that time, those houses all need to be renovated. You find yourself always living under renovations. It's like, man, I just finished renovating this house. I'm going to take the next 3 months off. Nope, next house, tenant moves out. Got to renovate it. Got to renovate a unit. The next one, in the lower corner, although I have 16 unit here, if it's a 6 unit, It's better than having three houses because all in one location, but you can't afford a manager. So you find yourself still self-employed, still working. The benefit is on the opposite side, just like in the cash flow quadrant, where you can get three 16-unit buildings. How do you pay for that? Joint venture partners pay for it. You oversee it, get managers to manage it, share in the profit, not limited by what's in your pocket because you're using their money. At the same time, once you get big enough, you can take your profits from this and just become the person in the lower section where you're loaning money out and receiving passive income, which is taxed, and you're receiving your passive benefit from investing in properties, but having the active manager take care of it. Now, having said that mouthful, ultimately, let's talk a little bit about the plan for 2022. Large sums of knowledge is required. Bottom line. Why is that? Because you have to have the fundamentals, the operating skill, and the networking ability. You have to have a main strategy, and you have to have a business system. At the same time, you have to be able to write your own story, to be interesting, to be memorable. So people will actually invite you out to different events or situations. Just a week ago, I was at an event and I was talking to a gentleman. I didn't realize he owns a building that's being built 400 units. And the fact is, because of my conversation with him, he liked who I was. He said to me, let's go out for dinner. Let's meet again. And from there, I don't know what will happen, but whatever's going to happen, I believe will be good. But I had to know who I was and have to have my own story in order to impress him enough to say, I want to hear more of your story. Prospecting, how to influence people, how to sell, how to negotiate. Those are all critical elements that you have to brush up on to have superior knowledge to take the next level, to go from getting water from the river to actually having tap water in the house. It requires an investment. Now, the next step is to find clients, and these clients will be people who are going to invest in your property. At the same time, you have to find great properties, and you do it simultaneously. So what do we mean by finding clients? Well, you have to know your clients. You have to understand how to bring them into a joint venture conversation. You have to understand the types of systems that exist out there to match their needs, and you have to understand how to finance a deal, how to structure it. Also, a good understanding of private money, VTBs, or joint venture. And what you want to do is you want to build a database of high net worth individuals. And that's what I focus on doing. How do I build a database of people who can afford to JV, loan money, or can afford to sell their building? At the same time, I'm looking for a building. I have to understand how to study an area. I must understand the scripts on how to talk to the property manager, to the owner, to the superintendent. I have to understand how to view that property. Got to know the numbers. Does it make sense? Got to understand how to analyze the deal, how to negotiate the best prices, how to put together my purchase agreements to offer, and the clauses that go in there. Everything that I'm talking about here requires superior knowledge, an understanding of fundamentals, operation, and networking. Due diligence. How do I know that what they're telling me actually means anything? And what are the repairs I have to actually understand to make this thing actually happen? That's an important set of knowledge that's required. I have to understand how to manage that property. Although I don't want to be the property manager, I have to manage the managers, must have that understanding, and I have to understand the corporate setup. In the end, I want to have a database of off-market deals. So how do you build wealth? With superior knowledge, you get to build a database of high net worth people. And you build a database of properties available for sale that were off market, and you bring them together. It's almost like a dating service, or you're a marriage counselor. So what I'm really doing is I'm bringing the high net database to the off market property. And as I bring them together, either I wholesale the property, in other words, I assign it to somebody else. So assigning to somebody else or wholesaling to somebody else could mean $100,000 in my pocket without actually buying the property. And I don't have to have a job of credit because I'm actually not buying it. I'm assigning it, I'm wholesaling it. Or I can buy that property. I can bring a JV partner in as well to help me buy that property. So this is the path forward that you have to master to make 2022, 2023 an amazing year. Now, I know it's hard. It's difficult because it's hard to get information. One of the biggest problems out there is not information, but it's cluttered information, scattered information, bits and pieces, and missing parts. And because of that, people lose money. So here's what I've done. I've taken the last year to put together something pretty amazing. Because what I want to do is I don't want you to work in order to have that money, buy a property and sit there for 15 years. I would rather that you had superior knowledge in how the fundamentals works, the networking works, the finding partners works, the funding property and the systems in order to convince people that their money is in a safe place. And that's it, isn't it? Other people's money, OPM, will not show up on your doorstep because money is like a reptile. It doesn't love you, it doesn't love the owner. It's cold-blooded. You have to show them that you understand how to take good care of their money, how to not do the river water thing, do the tap, not do the horse thing, but do the car thing, not do the sword thing, do the gun thing. You need to understand how that's done, and that has a cost. What I've done for you in the last year, which took me 30 years of experience, but 1 year to build, I recorded 100 master class training videos. Each video is roughly 20 minutes to about an hour, and they're broken down into the right sequence, the right order, complete with a PowerPoint background so that I'm not just talking, but I'm showing you pictures and words. And this has a breakdown or an example that looks more like this. We have strategies where I go through the 15 most popular strategies and I give you my take on it. Then we break into the fundamentals of how real estate works and the networking, how to meet people. Then we go to how to find investors and then how to actually do the basics and standard part of buying a property. Well, I would look at wholesaling, assignment of contract, then multifamily. I would look at the game of life to be able to explain to people where they are in the game of life, cause them to act a bit sooner. I would learn how to combine assignments and co-venturing or joint venturing. I would understand the fundamentals of wealth. I would then learn how to write my own story and how to influence people, not manipulate, how to influence them to do things that benefit you and them. Also, how to scale up your business. Even though we're at the beginning, you should understand how to scale up. I would talk about finding clients, how to spot joint venture partners 20 feet away, how to understand your client, not just find them, how to explain joint venturing, then into the essentials, how do you find those off-market properties? And how do you study an area? How do you understand the key numbers that you need to know to be able to analyze a property? How do you walk through the property and know what's good or bad? What are the upgrades? You want to understand what are the clauses or the offers you put in there, your agreements, to actually make things happen, and how do you manage property? So I would look at probably those 18 of the first 100 videos. And of course, we also talk a bit about development and also self-storage. I love this next section. What I've done here, I've put together 58, now soon to be 60, and shortly after 70 phone calls where I'm actually speaking improv, unscripted, to property owners about their properties that are not for sale. I'm actually causing them to go for sale. I'm talking to property managers, I'm talking to superintendents, and I'm speaking to secretaries. And I'm going through this process showing you how to actually do it while you're listening. Now, after these phone calls, our assistant will call and say, hey, can we use that for a training tool? And we'll subtract away the address and your name or any identifiable factors. And if they say yes, I include them here. No one else on the planet offers this service where you can sit there and listen to over 60 calls, like I said, soon to be 70, of me actually speaking in the moment, improv, no BS here. You know, teacher in class can talk as much as they want to talk, but when they have to talk to real people, now that brings your talent out. And I'll talk about how to get those assignment deals, number one. I'll talk about the whole first and second conversation you have with them. I'll give you examples of how I turned a no sale into an assignment. Even also how I called somebody with, nope, it's not for sale, and I turned it into a hat trick, which means not only did I get the person to want to sell it, I got the person to want to take on some new deals that I find, and I got the person to think, hey, I'll joint venture with you or I'll finance you. I talked to another lady who had a building for sale, but I convinced her to sell her sixplex, her 2 houses, and some land as well. At the same time, when it comes to financing, I'm showing an example of how I talk to somebody to get an extension on financing. So there are about 58 to 60 of these, and I think they're really worth going through. And lastly, before I finish up, the next section, I've put together about 85 files that I think you need to know in order to actually conduct your business. To me, these are the tools required in order to actually do deals. And it could be that speaking flow chart. For an example, when I call somebody, I ask them, do you want to sell? If they say no, by the way, any other properties for sale? No. Okay, just before I get off the phone, are you still growing? If they say yes, I may say, well, let me know what you're growing, what direction you're growing in, because if I find a property that I've secured from my buying and I choose not to buy it, I can probably assign it to you. Would you be interested? Now I create a database of people who might take over my wholesale fees. Or I may create a database for people who are saying, I don't want to, let's say, keep growing, but maybe they still want to join venture with somebody, be more passive, or even they may want to just lend money. So in my process here, I'm just going through what are the stages. And this is just a very simple diagram. This one here, number one, not even the first 5 calls, not even the analysis spreadsheet number 3, not even script number 1, 2, and 3 of speaking to these people, as well as the actual agreements for putting in deals. So I think this is very critical. Okay, let me end up with this. What does it all cost? Because there's always a cost. Well, the 100 videos, plus the 60 audios, plus the 80 working papers, I always upgrade these things. I add new ones on a monthly basis, and they're all in the right sequence. Right now, there's about 64 hours of my teaching. Literally, to get to this, you would go, number one, to rccsol.com/videos, choose select the buy video library, enter your name, your email, and your new password. Yeah, I know, 64 hours. You think it's probably $10,000, but it's not. It's $19.97 plus HST will get you into this video library. And being in the library, you'll find that you're going to get the answers you need in order to go forward. For me, this is a gift of, I think, love, because ultimately, I know it sounds corny, but I didn't have to. It's something that I felt that I needed to. Because once you get to a point, you want to be able to share your information with the masses, but I do have to recover the entire amount of time that I put into this and make a profit with it. People always say to me, well, if you're wealthy, why would you not do it for free? I don't know anybody who does things for free who's wealthy. To be wealthy, you have to respect your time. And you go up the mountain respecting your time. But if you stop respecting your time, then you get down the mountain pretty quickly. All my friends who are multimillionaires, and I have a few who are billionaires, they respect their time value. And I do too, and I want you to as well. So show me respect by paying for this program. It's 31 years of my training, a whole year, COVID year, of me putting information on the table for you. A lot of people said it's a wasted year. No, if you're wealthy, you don't waste a year. Yeah, COVID locked us all away, but I spent that time being productive, and I'm going to benefit from it. And a portion of this will go to the charity that I think is very close to my heart. So in closing, I want you to understand that the fundamentals that you require is what helps you get the OPM. At the same time, to get those fundamentals, it's $19.97. Click buy video, and let's see if I can visit you, or you can visit me on the beach, maybe in Belize. And I thank you for your time. And I hope this really helps you. And if you're a realtor who's thinking, maybe I want to talk to some of my customers and convince them that maybe real estate is a place for them to be, have them watch this video. If you have cousins or nephews or uncles or aunts, just not into real estate, or even friends, have them watch this video. The first 15 minutes of this video talks about those properties that I bought. Just the 3 properties, and 15 years later, put $2.5 million, $2.25 million in my pocket if I were to retire 15 years after. And that's important. Have a great day.